So you developed a Flask application and everything is ready, and now you want to understand how to get started deploy it in a production server. So one of the most complicated topics about how to deploy a Flask web application to a production server is handling static files. Static files are used to be your files that you store within the project in order to style your project. Things like the Bootstrap framework needs to be stored in a directory that is called static, and the collection of all those files are called static files. So we are going to learn how to handle those files in development environment and as well as handling them in a production environment, because those two cases are completely different, and for sure you want to watch this video because it will give you a complete picture how to handle static files on both of those environments. So let's get started. So this is the project that we are going to use to explain how static files work on both environments, development and production. Feel free to go ahead and clone this repository to follow along with this tutorial, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to open the PyCharm in this project, and you can see that it has a very minimalistic Python file which uses the Flask class and initializes it to basically create a web application, and it has only one route which points to some template that is obviously stored in the templates directory, and it has a home.html, and you can see that there is nothing too much complicated in the app.run section, and I use this convention in order to check if the file has run directly or not. You can see it uses port 5000 and debug mode is on. Now if we were to execute this file by saying python main.py and go ahead and check out the results, and you are going to see here some weird thing, because you can see that the page looks like it doesn't have any styling, but however the logo of my website is being showed just right in here. So let's explore what is going on in the home.html file, and you will understand that the result makes a lot of sense here. So by convention, you want to store all your static files in a directory that is called static. And not sure if you have noticed this or not, but actually this is exactly the scenario in our project. We have a directory right where the main.py file is, and it has some style files. You can see that it also has a logo.png file, which is happen to store my personal logo here. And you can see that we also have a Bootstrap style sheet, which includes tons of styles, and that is what we are going to use in order to style our web application in a better way. Now in the home.html, you can see that, for example, we have a navbar because there is a nav tag, and you can see that here exactly in this line it tries to access this logo.png file with some Jinja syntax. You can see that it uses an image tag and it uses the URL for built-in function in the Jinja syntax. And this is how you can relate to your static files in the template level. You can basically execute the URL for built-in function, and you're always going to try to search for the static URL, and then you're gonna need to point to the file that you want to be showing in the website. And that's exactly what is going on here, and that's why we see the logo being shown in the top left area on our website. Now in addition, you could notice that there wasn't too much nice styling in our page because we happen to see just only a blue text, and that's because we did not import the Bootstrap file into our template, and that is achievable by this line which is commented out. Let me uncomment it, and you can see that it uses pretty much the same convention, but only it uses the link tag, and as a reference it again uses the URL for built-in function, and it tries to search it in the static, and the file name is bootstrap.minify.css. So what that means? It means that by convention, Flask searches all its static files in a directory that is called static, and you need to make sure that you don't go away from those conventions. So every time you use a URL for, make sure that you pass static as the first argument, and the second argument will be the file that you want to import or show some image, whatever you want to do with that. So once we have this, then we can test if that is going to work for us. Now make sure that you don't only use F5 if it doesn't work in the first attempt, you also use Control F5, which will also clean the cache. And now you can see that the result is very different because we were able to import our static files. Now, that's exactly how you want to work with your static files in a development environment. But once it comes to a production environment, things could get a little bit more complicated, and this is what we are going to cover just right now. Alright, so in order to continue from here, then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and use a server that is going to be hosted on cloud, so we can pretend that we are going to host this web application in a production environment. Now, if we want to follow along, then you can go ahead and create a server on your own by going to the link, which is the Linode link, which is happen to be a very friendly cloud environment that you can go ahead and create your own servers. And if you are a new user, then it will also give you a nice amount of credit to get started with. And if you need more information about how to create servers with Linode, then I have a video that is showing how to get started with it, so feel free to watch this video before going back to continuing on this one. So right now I'm having a SSH shell to a server that is hosted on cloud, which I'm going to use just right now. So no matter which directory I'm using right now, I'm just going to try to do things very simple and show you what needs to be done to host this web application on production with all the best practices and how to handle static files. So I'm going to start by creating a directory that will call this web. And if I want to show you where I am right now, we can use pvd, and you can see that I'm just in the home location of this Ubuntu user. And we can use a cd web, and here's the exact location that I'm going to git clone our project. Now if we go back to our repository here and actually copy this from here and use a git clone and paste this in, then we should be able to get the project. Now if I was to cd Flask base app and clear the screen and say dir to show you the files, then you can see that everything is right here. Now one of the first things that we're going to start doing is editing our main.py file, and that is something that you can do with a text editor that you can use commands like nano or vi or vim. I'm going to use vim to edit one of the files here, which will be main.py. Now if you are using the same command like I do here, then make sure that you follow the instructions if that is the first time that you edit Linux files. So I'm going to press down arrow a couple of times to go to the line that I want to edit, and then I'm going to press end and then click on insert because I want to start editing this file. Now the first thing that I want to edit is this host value, which we will set it to an IP address that will point to all the interfaces. So we do not want to intentionally host this website now in a localhost IP address, but besides we want to say it that we'd like to bind the connection to other location, and that is doable by using the 4 times 0 IP address. So I'm going to say here 0.0.0.0 like that. And once we have done this, then the additional action that we want to do here is to set up the debug value to false, because now we are not in debug mode. We do not want to show the errors to our clients. So that is why we're gonna need to say here debug equals to false. Now pay attention what you need to do in order to save this file. I'm going to press on escape, and then I'm going to use colon, and then I'm going to say wq and then an exclamation mark and press enter. This action will be responsible to save a Linux file. And now if I was to press enter, then you can see that we are back in the terminal like we used to be. And if we were to test our changes by using the cat command and just point to the main.py file, then you can see that changes are activated because we see host, new value, and debug equals to false. Alright, so now that we have done this, then we are going to set up this project inside a virtual environment. Now you can relate to a virtual environment like a separated Python interpreter on your server, and we need to do that because we want to work with a separated environment that only has the necessary pip packages that we need, like Flask and more packages that we're going to talk just right now. So if you want to know more about virtual environments, then I actually have a very dedicated tutorial on that, which you can decide that you want to watch it right now, and the link is in the description. So in order to work with virtual environments on an Ubuntu server, we need to install its package, and it is going to be with the following command. So we're gonna need to use sudo for root privileges, and we're gonna need to say apt install python 3-venv like that. And we're gonna need to confirm it if it asks us, but it does not. So make sure that you press on Y if it asks for confirmation for your side. And now I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to say python 3-m. So M stands for module that we might want to use, and we're gonna need to use venv module. Now this is also going to be responsible to create a new folder, and we are going to call this venv, so make sure that you specify it one more time. And if we were to say ls to show all the content, then you can see that we have a directory that is called venv. Now I'm going to activate this virtual environment by saying source venv bin activate, right? So we want to install the packages on this separated virtual environment, and this is the command that you can do that to activate this virtual environment. And then before I'm going to say pip install -r requirements.txt, I'm going to show you what is inside the requirements.txt file. So you can see that we have Flask, but we also have Gunicorn. Now Gunicorn is just another Python module that is considered as a web server that needs to be used in a production environment with Flask. Now we are going to see how we are going to use it, but first we want to make sure that this one is also installed in our virtual environment. So now I'm going to say pip install -r requirements.txt, and it has been completed successfully. Now let me show you one piece of information that is quite important. I'm going to change to the tab of my local server, to my local machine, and I'm going to again run this application in our development mode. Now you can see that it shows us this is a development server. Do not use it in a production environment. Use a production WSGI server instead. Gunicorn is exactly the definition of WSGI server that we should be using in a production environment, and that is why we installed this Gunicorn library. This is going to be an alternative to executing Python main.py to execute our Flask applications. Besides, we are going to do that with Gunicorn. Alright, so now that we understood this, then we're gonna need to go back to our SSH connection to the Ubuntu server, and we're gonna need to set up this Gunicorn. Now, first things first, we want to make sure that Gunicorn is installed successfully. So just type this command, and so you can see that it is not installed. It says no application module specified. So it means that it recognizes the command, but it does not have all the necessary arguments. So this means that we have done a great job, and we can clear the screen and continue from here. Alright, so now that we understood this, let's see what Gunicorn command we need to use in order to execute this application. So we're gonna start by saying Gunicorn, and then I'm going to say --bind, and we want to bind it to the localhost IP for now, and we want to make sure that it uses the connection of 5000. And then in Gunicorn you have an option to specify the amount of workers that you want to have. So if we were to say -w2, then it is going to have two workers to handle all your requests. And this workers option is one more reason that we want to use Gunicorn rather than Flask, right? Just execute in Python main.py or any name of a file. And now that we specify this, Gunicorn needs to know what Flask application it is going to handle. So we want to specify the name of the file, which is main, and this should be followed by the colon sign and the name of the variable that handles the Flask instance. Now, if you remember, we used to have app equals to something in our application. If we were to open PyCharm, we can totally see that. So we need to point to the app variable. So I'm going to say here app very easily, and let's make it bigger so we can see more clear. So now the command is ready to be executed, but I'm going to add here a space and I'm going to add this end sign in order to tell the Linux environment to run this process in the background. And this will be helpful because we want to take some more actions. So running this in the background as a temporary process is good. So I'm going to execute that. And I'm going to press enter, and you can see that we have our environment back. Now, if you want to make sure that this runs as a background process, then you can go ahead and execute the jobs command, and you can see that it is running in the background. We see the status of running. Now, one quick side note, using the approach of adding this end sign as the latest character is a temporary approach. Once you log out from this server, then all the jobs, all the temporary jobs that are running are going to be quitted immediately. But I'm allowing myself to do that because I want to just make sure that you understand how an environment should have been set up in a production to running processes and services persistently. So explaining how to run processes on boot and once you log into the server is off topic for now, and that is why I'm using this temporary approach here. Okay, so now that we understood this, then let's get out from our virtual environment by saying deactivate like that. So currently we have a web server hosted on localhost IP and on port 5000 thanks to the Gunicorn. But now we need to figure out how we are going to expose the traffic outside to the entire world. Now this is something that you should be doing by a reverse proxy tool. And what that means, it means that we need to be using dedicated tools that are going to be very useful once we are talking about hosting a web application to the entire world. Now, there are applications like Apache 2, Nginx, maybe that you might have heard of. So we need to use one of those in order to basically have a web application that is going to be hosted with port 80, and that's what we are going to do just right now. We are going to install Nginx as the reverse proxy engine, and then we are going to configure it in a way that it will forward its traffic to the Flask web application that it is running. So we will have a nice cycle of services working together. Nginx being the reverse proxy that is going to be hosted with port 80, so it will be accessible only by the machine's IP address, and it will forward all the connections to the Flask web application that is currently running in the background with the Gunicorn command. So first things first, we want to install Nginx on our server. So it is going to be sudo apt get install Nginx like that. And we are going to approve this with capital Y. And we are going to wait a minute until it's done. Alright, so we have Nginx installed on our computer. Now what we want to do in that second is checking out if Nginx currently is running successfully on our server. And that's doable by checking if the service of Nginx is running successfully. So we can say something like the following. So I'm going to use sudo to use high privileges, and I'm going to say systemctl, which stands for system control, where you can execute multiple commands to control your system. And I'm going to check the status of Nginx. And you can see that we receive here active running. So it means that it is running successfully. and you can press now Q on your keyboard to get out of the logs that you were seeing just a second ago. So now we are back on our terminal. So now that we have Nginx running, this means that now our server is hosting some sort of basic minimalistic web application in this server, because this is exactly what Nginx does. So if we were to go to the web browser and enter the public IP address of this server, then we should see some results. Now, one way that you can check the public IP of your server is obviously from the UI of the Linode, but you can also execute a command that will give you back the public IP address. Now, after searching a little bit on Stack Overflow how to get public IP address not only from the cloud provider, which could be Linode, AWS, or something else, you can actually go ahead and say curl https :// and then we can say ipinfo.io/IP. Now you can see that right here we see the public IP address. So this means that I can bring now a web browser and try to put this IP in the search bar and expect to get some results. And if we were to do that, then you can see here that we have the results. So you see that I entered the public IP address in the search bar on my Google Chrome, and you can see that I received back welcome to Nginx. Now I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure why we have seen this dangerous alert here on the Google Chrome browser. It might be because lately I have tried to access a lot of public IPs because I created a lot of machines in AWS, Linode, and in different cloud providers. So maybe now the Google Chrome browser tries to warn me before I go ahead and just enter random public IP addresses to access my different servers. And take a note that, of course, the public IP address that I'm showing right now is obviously not going to be available once you watch this video. And the IP address that you should try here should be your own public IP address that you would receive by executing this command, which I found useful from Stack Overflow, again, to just see my public IP address of this server. Alright, so now that we have done this, then let's see how we should configure our Nginx service in order to forward all the traffic to the localhost 5000 port. And this is the location for the Flask web application that is currently running on this Ubuntu server. So in order to do that, we're gonna need to point to the directory where all the configuration files about Nginx is being stored. Now we are going to start by creating a new file that will be our own dedicated file for this Nginx service, which we will use it as a configuration for this service. So I will say vim, and I will use sudo privileges here, and I will say etc nginx conf.d, and then intentionally we want to name this file default.conf. So now we can press enter, and you can see that it says here new file in below. So now we should press on insert and start editing this file. Now, not sure if you spotted this or not, but I actually prepared here in the repository the Nginx configuration that I want to store exactly in this file. So I will copy that and I will paste this in here with my right mouse click. And then I will go down here and I will just replace this public IP with the IP address of our machine, which will be 18.218.172.106, like that. Now this is my public IP address. Of course, make sure that you use your own public IP address. Now, speaking about what is going on in this configuration, you can see that this is just a server block which configures the Nginx service in a high level. And you can see that first, for all the traffic that arrives for the root location, meaning only the /, just forward your traffic to this IP address, to this location, localhost 5000. And you can see that we also do a similar approach with the static files. Whenever you try to access this URL, then go ahead and try to pull your static content from this location. Now, this location is obviously where our static files are being stored in our project. So it is important to make it the accurate directory where the static files are stored on your project. So we will press on escape and colon WQ to save this file. It could be WQ question exclamation mark or just without it, it's fine. So now that we have this, then we're gonna need to reload our Nginx service. So it is doable by sudo systemctl reload Nginx. And now that we have done this, let's clean our screen first. And now we are ready to see if that is going to work for us. Now you can see that here now, if I was to reload it, then you can see that every time I refresh, I see a perfect result. I see the logo and I see a nicely styled navigation bar. So this is about how you should handle your static files. Static files should be handled by a reverse proxy, and that is the main important thing that you might want to understand when you talk about deploying your Flask application. And this is the most confusing part in my opinion when it comes to deploying a Flask application to production. Handling the static files is always not easy, but with this templated configuration file now, you know how you should be handling your static files. Always make sure that you point your static location in the configuration of Nginx to the correct location, and just make sure that you use this approach of configuration when it comes to hosting your website with an Nginx reverse proxy. Okay, so I hope everyone learned something new in that video. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, and also consider subscribing to my channel because I have a lot of videos that are even more detailed than this one, which you will find them very, very interesting. Okay, so again, I really hope you enjoyed it and see you next time.